In our first episode, we got into a history of theft. We covered how Europeans organized themselves into armed, academically motivated, and religious campaigns to separate us from our individually and communally owned property. Check it out. So this has led to present-day campaigns by Africans to seek the restitution or restoration of these objects and human ancestors to their families or communities of origin, often through their return or other actions that would constitute a repair. It's personal, okay? It's political, and it's taking so long that there's a history to the process itself. That's what this episode is about. Because it might be tempting to imagine that Africans only in these last 10 years remembered that they wanted those 11 sacred tabots that represent the Ark of the Covenant of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, that we've just remembered Gonso, the statue of the Queen Mother of Cameroon's Nso people, not to mention the remains of our freedom fighters and the hundreds of thousands of invaluable, sacred, artful, and ordinary objects stuck in the West. And now, 100 years later, now we would like them back. Yeah, no. Africans demanded the return of our property immediately, or as soon as the theft was discovered. Take, for example, the case of Jacobus Hendrik, a Nama schoolmaster in present-day Namibia. He was killed in a raid in 1884 with 2 others. They were buried by their local chief or captain, a man named Jan Jonker Afrikaner. 8 months later, a young German scientist named Beck raided the graves to ship to Berlin for scientific purposes. He even published an account of his crimes, including how Jacobus Hendrik's daughter, having learned about the robbery, confronted him, demanding the remains of her father, as most people would, then or now. That's a demand for restitution, for the restoration of her father's remains. And he faked it. Belk gave her a skull and a few other human remains, sure, but the skull was not her father's, but one of the other 2 whose remains had been exhumed, a man whose skull was damaged and thus of lesser value to Belk. He misled her on purpose. Again, this matter was published and discussed among Berlin's scientific and academic community in 1885. At no point then or since has anyone from that community felt obliged to return Jacobus Hendrik's remains. One of Hendrik's descendants, Heinz Eichab, recounted his grandmother's stories of these foreigners' desecration of the dead, how they exhumed and exported them over the water. The stories have been passed down. Generations later, he has learned the true location of his ancestor and the true account of how individuals, whole scientific, religious, state, and now legal machinery treated his ancestors. That's before we get into the fact that some of these remains were being used for eugenics research. But that's a story for another day. This by no means is a Namibian, or for that matter, an exclusively German problem. In our last episode, we shared the story of the Battle of Magdala in present-day Ethiopia, how the British burned what they couldn't sell and stole so much that they were carrying it on the backs of elephants. Yes, elephants. Johannes IV succeeded to Tewodros II, and grieving the incredible losses suffered at Magdala, wrote to Queen Victoria and the British Foreign Secretary within 8 months of his coronation in 1872, requesting the return of just 2 objects: the Kebra Nagast manuscript and an icon known as the Kwerata Re'esu, or representation of the Christ with the crown of thorns. It's a painting so precious that the previous time it was lost in wartime, the reigning emperor literally bought it back. The British Museum only agreed to return the manuscript when they realized they had 2 copies. As for the painting, Queen Victoria told Johannes IV in her December 1872 letter that England didn't have it, only for it to turn up exactly a year after Johannes's death as the property of the Queen's librarian. I wish I was making this up. So many Europeans lying and stealing with their chests and now claiming to be protecting our property. Here's a story about one time they got caught in the lie they could not easily weasel themselves out of. In the early 1920s, a German filmmaker and adventurer traveling in Liberia paid a fee to a Golo community paramount chief, which should have allowed him to film their Mafue stone, a religious artifact. The filmmaker, Hans Schomburg, proceeded to take the artifact, claiming the fee he had paid was payment, and sent it to the Museum of Ethnology in Hamburg. The Golo community protested the theft to their government. Independent since 1847, the Liberian government had a consul general in Hamburg, a man named Momolu Masakwe, who was also notably the first indigenous African diplomat to modern Europe. Masakwe then instituted legal proceedings against Schomburg and argued that the artifact, revered by the community over centuries, and therefore collectively owned, was no one person's property to sell, not even the paramount chief's. Germany could not ignore the lawsuit as easily as they ignored protests made on the continent. And so a settlement was reached and the Mafue stone was returned. From the 1950s, independence slowly but steadily swept the continent. Africa's political and intellectual class understood that part of what the peoples of their fledgling nation-states needed to move forward was a broader understanding of their past going back before the colonial period. Mobutu Sese Seko framed this idea for the Democratic Republic of Congo as authenticité. He sought an integration of the newly independent Congolese citizenry with their material heritage. It so happened that the Art of the Congo, an exhibition featuring 200 objects from the DRC's material heritage, was showing in the United States a year after Mobutu took power in 1966. The new president and emerging dictator demanded these objects from Belgium, but got nowhere. Nigeria went about things a bit differently. While they demanded objects taken from the Benin Kingdom in 1910 and 1935, after independence, they purchased a number of objects on the open market, including from the British Museum. This would have continued, but increased market prices after 1970 made the practice prohibitive. One of the big benefits of independence includes access to new legal structures and the realization of new rights. Following World War II era Nazi art looting, the international community, through the newly formed United Nations, developed the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. This basically said that cultural property should be protected from wartime destruction and should be maintained in its country of origin. African independence meant membership into the United Nations and its additional institutions like the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and the International Council of Museums, ICOM. Nigeria had already started working to shape ICOM in ways that might lead towards restitution. But in 1973, Mobutu took the fight to the UN General Assembly and put the issue squarely on the world stage. He argued,
Pendant la période coloniale, nous avons subi non seulement le colonialisme, l'esclavagisme, l'exploitation économique, mais aussi et surtout un pillage sauvage et systématique de toutes nos œuvres artistiques. C'est ainsi que les pays riches se sont appropriés nos meilleures et uniques pièces artistiques. Et nous sommes pauvres non seulement économiquement, mais aussi culturellement. C'est pourquoi je demande également que cette Assemblée générale vote une résolution demandant aux puissances riches qui possèdent des œuvres d'art des pays pauvres d'en restituer une partie afin que nous puissions enseigner à nos enfants et à nos petits-enfants l'histoire de leur pays.
Zaire, as DRC was called at the time, drafted a resolution and forced a vote. And in December 1973, the restitution of works of art to countries victims of expropriation, or Resolution 3187 as it came to be known, was passed, making Africa's demands for our cultural heritage officially a global matter, even providing a platform and basis for others elsewhere, like Greece, for example, to demand the restitution of their Parthenon marbles, which, by the way, were taken from Athens in early 1800s and have sat at the British Museum since 1816. In 1974, Senegal's Amadou Matambo was elected Director General of UNESCO, and he used that platform to raise the issue of restitution wherever possible. For example, he goes on record in a 1978 speech to the UN in which he makes a plea for the return of irreplaceable cultural heritage to those who have created it. Meanwhile, Nigeria turned to loans in an attempt to access their heritage. An iconic example occurs in the lead-up to the Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, FESTAC 1977, a month-long conference and celebration which brought together 17,000 Black artists and intellectuals from across Africa and the diaspora. The young head of the Nigerian Antiquities Service, Ekpo Eyo, initially requested several pieces on temporary loan from Britain for the exhibition. He wrote letter upon letter, visited London on multiple occasions, took pains to move in firm, yet non-threatening ways as only a Cambridge-educated young man would know how to. He held separate talks with East Germany, hoping that one side of the Cold War would come through. When it became clear that success was far off, he narrowed his request to just the mask of Queen Idia, the icon of the festival. Still nothing. Nonetheless, the image of the Queen Idia mask remained the logo of the festival and was strewn across Lagos on programs, album covers, flags, and later it found its way onto Nigeria's #1 note. Even in her absence, Queen Idia became the center of many public discussions about restitution in and well beyond Nigeria. Africans have exerted additional pressure on the West in the cultural arena by organizing exhibitions that tour around the world. Nigeria's Treasures of Ancient Nigeria, Legacy of 2,000 Years, curated by Ekpo Eyo in 1980, made a massive political statement. For the first time, the West had to treat Nigeria as a lender and comply with Nigeria's standards of how the exhibition should be presented and experience Nigeria telling its own story.
The role of our artists, especially in energizing this campaign, I think has just been phenomenal. I think so many Africans have watched the video clip of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie when she went to the Humboldt Forum, and they thought she would just talk about peace and security in Africa, and she located it around return over things. I think that was so powerful.
In his 2005 memoir, Wole Soyinka writes that as early as that Festac 77 conference, he'd argued in a moment of righteous rage at ancient wrongs that the Queen Idia mask was stolen property and that the aggrieved had a right to reclaim that property by any means. He proposed a scenario very much like that one museum scene in Marvel's 2018 Black Panther. Even in real life, demands for Africa's cultural objects have gotten more exciting and controversial. Africans have ditched three-piece suit conventions for less formal tactics.
So when I started this hashtag Bring Back Gonzo, the idea for me was I was tired of having conversations in the back door. I was tired of diplomatic processes of Cameroon or of people writing to the Ministry of Arts and Culture and then they write to Germany and then we don't get any feedback. Or we get this backdoor feedback saying they cannot give us Bang Gonzo because it's legally theirs, but they will loan it to us. And it was such a disgrace and a ridicule to me that I felt like people should know what's going on. How do you steal something from somebody and you tell them, okay, you give them back as a loan and then they will use it and give it back to you? So I wanted to have loud conversations. I wanted people to know that we and some people were asking for restitution, and Germany is just being very stubborn and and just being very shameless about how they were approaching restitution. And so on social media, we were regularly posting from our end, visualizing our pain. We used video productions to talk to different people from SAW, what Gonzo means to them, what the return will mean to them. And then also we tagged a lot of Germans and German institutions for them to understand that this conversation is going on and it's not stopping anytime soon. Effort started about 30 years ago. And because of this, we were able to really get in touch with the SPK, who is the acclaimed legal owner of Gonzo. And we had conversations with them, we had workshops with them. And from when we really had direct contact with them, that was sometimes around September of 2021. By June of 2022, we had the decision from Gonzo to return.
For me, I think the best lens with which to approach the issues of restitution of African heritage is with a human rights lens, human rights-based approaches. If you adopt human rights-based approaches, you adopt an approach of righting wrongs, of correcting injustices of the past. So we are part of a broader movement that wants to correct the injustices, repair the harm, get reparations for centuries of slavery, for the century of colonialism, and even for post-independent harms that are being done to our economies, our societies, and so on, especially in the extractive industry, where we see big multinational corporations, whether from the global north or lately also the global east, just literally coming and just looting resources and not paying their fair share of tax or so on. And part of what this entails is getting back heritage resources that we lost in this period.
Take the actions of Congolese activist Ngwatilo Mawiyoo, himself a descendant of a governor within the Kingdom of Congo. He stages the removal of stolen objects from museums to raise awareness in the present period of restitution demands. There are indeed countless activists and artists from across Africa and the diaspora who continue to do this work. In many ways, current African restitution advocates are walking in the paths laid by our forebears, those working shortly after independence, but also Our ancestors who suffered the original thefts and untold indignities in the course of colonial plunder and oppression. In short, Africa's demand for its history and culture is unrelenting. Why haven't these Western museums given us back our stuff? Next time, we look at a history of excuses.